Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening and watching from in the world, and welcome to the latest Infrastructure Intelligence webinar organised in association with communications consultancy BECG. My name's Andy Walker and I'm the editor of Infrastructure Intelligence, and I'm really looking forward to today's event, which is dealing with an issue which I think is extremely important, not just in our industry, but for the world of work and society in general, and that is looking at diversity and inclusion within the construction sector. We know that in the construction industry, there are some particular challenges around all aspects of diversity and inclusion, and I know that today's excellent panel will be actually hopefully doing some justice to looking at all of those particular issues, or many of them anyway, and hopefully leading to an extremely good discussion from you, the audience, as we move on throughout the event. Just a word on sort of housekeeping, as it were. The usual rules of engagement apply. If you've got any questions for any of the panelists or collectively, or wish to say anything, then please do pop them in the chat. If you do have a question and you want to put your company name down there as well, I'm happy to give you a shout out as well if that's applicable. So please do put any questions in there. First up, we will hear from all of our panelists, and then following that, we'll have a discussion, a Q&A, and then we'll sum things up, and we'll be all finished by around about 12:30. So as I say, hopefully we're going to have a very interesting discussion and informative discussion on the issue of diversity and inclusion in the construction sector. And I think linked to that as well, how do we attract the next generation into this industry? As I said, we've got an excellent panel for you today. And we're going to start with Roma Agrawal, who is an engineer, an author, a speaker, and a presenter. Roma is a structural engineer. She's also a broadcaster and has been seen and heard on many occasions talking about engineering and the industry. She's designed bridges, skyscrapers, and sculptures with many signature architects over her career. And she also spent quite a number of years working on the Shard. Roma is a keen promoter of engineering and technical careers to young people, particularly amongst underrepresented groups. And I can particularly recommend Roma's book, Built, which if you haven't read it, search for it, buy it and read it, because it's absolutely excellent. Anyway, that's enough from me. Roma, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I just want to check that I'm unmuted and you can hear me.
Indeed.
Fantastic. Andy, thank you again so much for having me here. What I wanted to do is to share my experience of the industry from the point of the systemic change. So I can sit here and tell you about the blatant sexism and racism I've experienced, but actually what I want to talk about is the system, because that's really where I think the change needs to come. So when people used to ask me to sit on panels such as this about 7 or 8 years ago, and inevitably would ask me, had my gender affected my career? I used to say, no, not really. Yes, it affected my confidence because, even now I'm pretty much in meetings, I'm usually the only woman there, usually the only person of color there. And so, especially in the beginning, this affected my confidence. I wouldn't speak up much. And yes, there was a sort of lack of role models. There were a few, but there was a bit of issue with role models, but otherwise it was pretty good. However, if you now ask me that today, having kind of reflected on my experience over the last 15 years, I would, really change my answer and say that actually being a brown woman has had a huge impact on my career in the ways that I've been treated. And sometimes it's in a great way, but more often than not, it's in a not so good way. And so I want to talk about kind of the barriers that have been put up in front of me just because of who I am, which is nothing to do with my skills or my interests or anything, but just because I happen to be a brown woman. So if I start with when I chose my degree when I was 16, which just for the record is way too young to be asking people to decide what they want to do with their career, I had the perfect A-levels for an engineering degree. I had maths, physics, and design and technology. I was in a girls' school for my A-levels, having moved over from India. Not one single person in my school ever suggested to me that I might consider engineering as a career. Had I been in a boys' school, I'm almost certain that they would have said, oh, have you thought about engineering? Have you considered engineering? So that's barrier one, the lack of the career insight, not even realizing that this was an option. And I do believe that that was very much down to the fact that I was a woman. So I went on and actually studied physics at university. So then I studied physics. I couldn't quite figure out what career I wanted. And then I figured out the engineering thing all by myself. And I decided to apply for a master's in structural engineering. So here there could have been another like literal barrier placed in front of me, because I was applying for these masters, and I did actually get onto a course at Imperial College London. And I was the only person in a cohort of about 120 students that did not have an engineering undergraduate degree. And in fact, most of them had been working in industry for a while. So Imperial could have very easily not admitted me onto the course. So that would have been a huge barrier just because I didn't have the undergraduate degree. But they did, for which I'm forever grateful. But then I found the course really hard because, I'd come there with a completely different knowledge base. So that was a really hard year for me, arguably because I'm a woman, because of this thing that happened when I was 16. And they could have just said no. And if they had said no, I probably wouldn't be sitting here as an engineer today. Then, as I tried to enter the industry, so I've done my master's, I've done my physics degree, I was basically denied graduate membership of one of our engineering institutions because my education of having physics and a master's in structural engineering didn't tick their boxes of what educational background they expect. But again, the reason that my educational journey was kind of different than the other engineers is probably because I'm a woman. So I want you to kind of reflect on how this incident, which happened when I was 16 in a girls' school, then has affected my career going forward. And when we talk about systemic discrimination, that is what we are talking about. And I'm pleased again to say that this particular engineering institution has looked at this stuff and I think is much more flexible now in who can be admitted. Then I had to apply for a job. I remember clearly I had a spreadsheet. I applied for 40 graduate jobs. I received 3 interviews and everything else was either no news or a rejection. So, companies like Arup, Motts, Jacobs, Faber, Atkins, all of the kind of typical engineering companies that a structural engineer might apply for, none of them even offered me an interview. And I'm guessing that's because I have a physics degree and it's a bit unusual and everybody else applying has got a more traditional 4-year engineering degree. Then there's the whole question of my name, and there are extensive studies which I'll let you look at yourself, which show that an identical CV with a Black or a Muslim or a foreign sounding name at the top of the CV is called for significantly lower number of interviews than a white male name at the top of the exactly same CV. But, I can't make a judgment on that. I don't know, and, so can you see again how there's like a systemic problem there? So what I wanted to kind of explain is with all of these systemic issues, that just simply getting into the profession, getting a graduate position was just full of barriers. And I had to kind of break through all of these different barriers. And I did, and I got in and I love it. And I've worked really hard. I'm good at my job. I have been offered amazing opportunities, but I've also created amazing opportunities for myself. And that's how this whole thing began, with me kind of going into the press and doing television shows and writing books and so on. So what did that feel like? I got a lot of support from a large number of people. Okay, so I had senior directors and people high up in the organizations providing me with a lot of support. But at the same time, there were a lot of people basically saying that I only got my opportunities because I'm a box ticking exercise, because I'm a woman, because I'm brown, and that my success was not deserved, and that I was kind of on this little like diversity hire kind of trajectory. And clearly I found that extremely frustrating, because I've just described to you the number of barriers I had to break just to get in. And the people that were saying these things, that were openly mocking my book, my MBE, my work, were senior directors in some of the former employers that I've worked for, which I think is completely unacceptable behavior. But this is something that carried on, years after I had left some of my former employers. I had to leave one of my former employers because they were actually restricting what I was saying on social media, and then opportunities that were coming to me because of who I am, because they wanted Roma to talk about something, were actively being taken away from me and handed to other people. So there was something really kind of strange about the way my success in the kind of the public eye was being treated by some people. And I mean, I can say that there was a decade of really hard work, of networking, of meeting people, of talking, of writing, of training myself in how to write and speak, and everything that sits behind where I've got to today. It's not something that just has happened. What am I doing now? I'm actually self-employed, and I'm not employed by an engineering firm for the first time in my career. And it kind of happened at that typical stage that it happens to women. So I had a child and I was on maternity leave. I got bored and I started pitching book ideas, and I managed to secure another book deal, which I'm super excited about. And I basically, then the pandemic hit, and then I'm meant to go back to work, and the work that was being offered to me didn't motivate me enough to say, okay, I'm going to put my book aside and go and do that. So I took a sabbatical, and then I decided to take voluntary redundancy because this book project has become like an all-consuming project for me. And I love that. Like, I love that I can take this year or maybe 18 months to sit and write and to spend time on myself and kind of think more deeply about what I want to do. But I never expected to do this. It was never, ever in my career plan to kind of fall out of the industry and write. I always thought I would be, running big, large, high-profile projects someday. And now the big question mark that's kind of sitting above my head is, how do I find like the job description or the job role that fits what I think are unusual set of skills across the communication and technical field? And that's something that I'm still trying to figure out. And I'm not the only one. There's actually a number of people like me. They tend to be women of color that have sort of fallen out of the industry or are struggling at this stage to figure out where they fit in. And, again, it's a question of how can the industry be more open to a more diverse range of skills. So what do we do about it? So I can't solve your problems, but you have a system that you might have some control over. Fix that system. That's my short message. Listen to your staff. So I know one of my, there's one large company I know of where they set up an LGBTQ+ network for the employees, and what the employees wanted there was like an opportunity to socialize and to get speakers in, and that's what they wanted. But then they created a sort of BAME, and I know there's problems with that term, but let me just use that for the minute, network. And then they thought one size fits all, and that's exactly what they want. And then the staff of people of color was telling them that's not what they wanted. And then there's this huge friction about, oh, what's happening? So just please start by listening to what people actually want in your particular firm. I can give you a great example of one of my former employers where they did deep dive surveys of the staff before they started designing a new office space. And people were telling them that women who are pumping their breasts for their children, which, trust me, takes a long time, were having to kind of rush along because there was somebody waiting outside the door waiting to pray. And that's not a comfortable situation for anyone. And having received this feedback, now the office space has been designed to accommodate all of these different needs. And my message is, now with that office, if you get people coming through the door who are from any different type of minority background or marginalized background, they will see that your company culture will care about them and will want to look after them. And so I've now said, stop hiring people who look like me. Stop trying to kind of say, oh yeah, we've done really well. We've hired people of color, we've hired women. But then if you don't pay me, promote me, respect me, and stop pulling me down because I have achieved success in a way that doesn't fit your view of what success looks like, then there's no point. So fix your system first and then hire people like me. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Roma, for that. I'm sure we'll return to a number of those issues in the discussion. Particularly interesting to hear about, you know, the lack of career insights, particularly for women, that are presented almost at the outset, really, you know, all the way back to school. And then obviously some of the, you know, the stuff that you spoke there about the barriers, I think will certainly chime with many of our panelists and many of our audience, I'm sure, as well. We move on to our next speaker now. And the next speaker is Anjali Pandoria, who's a project surveyor at Avi Contracts. She's passionate about driving diversity and inclusion across the construction industry, and I know has spoken at many industry events, raising the profile on this particular issue. And I'm sure that our audience and indeed our panelists will be interested in listening to what Anjali has got to say. So, Anjali, over to you. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anjali, a project surveyor at a family-run carpentry and joinery subcontractor. I absolutely love my job, just like Roma. And hearing Roma, it seems like, you know, it's like an echo of my life. So, you know, hopefully I won't repeat too much, but I absolutely love my job. But working in construction is an everyday challenge. Why? Because of the way I look. My ability to be a surveyor on occasion is judged, unfortunately, by my appearance and my exterior, rather than where I can add value to projects. I mean, I had to fight society's expectations of becoming an accountant or lawyer to prove that this is an amazing career. There is opportunity for people who don't just fit the stereotype to go into, only to get here and I had to find the fight in me to want to stay in this sector. You know, that was the challenging thing. I got here and I thought, were they all right? I make up a small percent of, you know, people who fit the same tick box as me in terms of appearance, age, and gender. But what most people fail to see is my passion for the same tick box that they sit in, and that's construction. You know, if we stripped everything back and we look at why we're all here, it's all to achieve the same goal. And it's an industry I'm passionate to bring change to, because I believe our exterior should not determine what we're capable of. You know, the way you look should not affect you professionally or in life for that matter, because too many times I've had the, oh, you're too young to understand. You know, oh, so do you twist the light bulb when you're out dancing? And my personal favorite being, oh, they didn't say they were sending a girl. So sometimes I sit there and I wonder, where would we all be without these barriers? And, you know, if we were all starting from the same start line. I fear sometimes when I speak out, because I feel I'm compromising my career. Working for a subcontractor, you know, sometimes I fear big corporate companies are going to be listening in and we could lose business. But I then have to quickly remember the young girl in me that was on site one day, was hurled so much abuse by a man standing in front of me, and all these big macho men came out of the rooms and they stood there and they watched. Nobody jumped in, even though I was getting called everything under the sun. And I remember the voice that needs to be heard so others can feel that they can speak up, so we can have progressive change. As a young girl who struggled to find her place in this industry, you know, we need to rethink our approaches, not on just how we invest money, but how we're investing time into the next generation to plug the skills gap and increase inclusion. You know, we all know the statistics of the amount of people that are leaving the industry through retirements and, you know, Brexit and so on, and how many people we need to replace them. the statistics of how many minorities we have, etc. But are we all just talk and no action? You know, we really need to devise our own marketing plan and like rebrand ourselves, but not as corporate companies. Like I know Roma mentioned it, you know, all these big companies can speak out and say, we're doing so well in X, Y, Z, but what are we doing as an industry face? You know, we all want to make the same change, but are we beyond making the big changes? Do we need to start thinking about the smaller impacts that can make the larger differences? So one way I personally channel this by myself, you know, without anything, is going back to my own community and challenging them through, you know, careers talks and events. Growing up as a, you know, young Asian female, I had to break away from the stereotypes and norms of what someone like me should be doing and what career I should follow. So I know the vital importance of changing the mindset of society. So speaking directly to parents within groups that hold stigmas of careers is the best way we can help the next generation gain support and strengthen our industry. The other big question that really hinders diversity is the attraction of our sector. Do the people out there really know what we do? Do we sell ourselves beyond the bricks, mortar and glass? You know, do we understand what we're good for rather than letting the media make a circus of us and dictate what we should be portrayed like? I mean, the recent train saga during COVID is a perfect example of this. People saw all those pictures on social media of all those construction operatives as a hindrance to society rather than the cogs that were keeping our economy growing. You know, those people that were working on healthcare centers. I myself was one of those people going on the trains, going to work to help make sure we met the target of building a hospital. And, you know, we, at the end of the day, are building communities and groups for society. So how do we improve this? Where do we go from here? I think we need to have a combination of inwards and outwards reflection. Firstly, starting with just basic understanding and acknowledgement of where we are in the sector, no matter how big or small our business is. You know, small reflections of our everyday life will make us reflect, are we adding to that stigma? What can I do in my daily life to be a bigger influence, not just, you know, going out there and things like that, but, you know, doing small things. Secondly, bringing everyone to the conversation. Our biggest factor for the lack of inclusion is our hierarchy. We have a 10% versus 90% split. 10% being the government, industry bodies, and main contractors, where conversations around inclusivity are happening. And we're seeing it happen at top levels, but the representation is much smaller, versus 90%, which I kind of fall into, which are the 308,000 plus companies we have comprising of supply chain merchants and tertiary contractors, where we have no records or track where the conversation of inclusivity even is. And with our predominantly self-employed workforce, how are we helping to support those people to understand? You know, so I feel we're always preaching to the converted, but it's making it harder to actually gain a true representation of what kind of inclusion and understanding we need. And thirdly, I think we need to look outwards. So how we're engaging with communities, schools, universities, and supporting them. Because, for example, I'm looking at the higher education construction related courses right now, and the syllabus when I was learning years ago is exactly the same as it is now. It's repetition. The case studies to the point where they use the same case studies. You know, I have students coming to ask me, could you help me with this assignment? So I have a look and then I think, oh my gosh, I did that when I was there. So if we're an evolving industry, we need to reflect that in what we're teaching the next generation, or we're going to really risk, you know, losing them to other sectors, or, you know, risk them not even being employment ready. So we need to portray and show the digital transformation in the learning and education we have, so it really does attract that next generation. And conversations around inclusion are more important than ever, not just because it's good for your business, but because it's the betterment of the mental health of the people in our sector. You know, representation matters. And if anyone feels that they can't be themselves in an environment that they spend most of their life in, then I think we really have some big problems here. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed for that. Again, I think some really excellent points raised there. I think I'm interested in this concept, which I'm sure we'll come on to a little bit later, about the rebranding of the industry. Always a hot topic, always raised when we're talking about how attractive or otherwise this industry is to new entrants, and how do we go about that. I also think as well what you said there about this risk of losing people to other sectors is something that the industry really does need to address and sit up and take notice on. And I think one of the solutions, although not the only solution within that, I think is highlighting the digital impact and the digital content in our industry, because I think that's something that's mushroomed in recent years, and I think it's something that makes the industry more attractive, particularly to a younger generation as well. And we know that post-pandemic, and indeed during the pandemic, the digital sphere and involvement in our industry has become more high profile than ever before. And I know this is something that maybe Verity might touch on a little bit later on, but it's certainly changed the face of many businesses, especially construction. And there's a lot of talk, isn't there, in the industry at the moment about the digitalization, or is it digitization? I never know. I should do as a journalist, but I never know which is the right word. But anyway, that's not important. Digital is very much a key part of the modern construction sector now. And I think it's something that we need to highlight more than we actually do as well. Anyway, moving on to our next panelist, and that's Sendra Sylvester, who is an equality, diversity and inclusion specialist at the multidisciplinary consultancy Atkins, and she has that role for the UK in Europe. And that's a role that involves ensuring that ED&I is embedded into all aspects of Atkins's people plan, and indeed everything that the organisation does. So no pressure there in terms of that particular role for Sendra, who has previously worked in the financial sector, where she does have significant experience of business transformation. So Sendra, over to you.
Brilliant. Just checking everyone can hear me. Yeah, brilliant. Good. Thanks, Andy, and hello to all the panelists and everyone who has joined us live today and will be listening to recording perhaps. I'm delighted to be here today and taking part in this really important discussion alongside such an excellent panel. Already what I've heard, I can resonate with a lot of it, and I can only say that I'm not surprised with the challenges or the barriers, but I'll come to it a bit later. So first of all, thank you, Andy, and to Infrastructure Intelligence for organising this, inviting me along. I thought it'll be good to start with a little bit about myself and how I've ended up sitting here in front of you today, albeit virtually. So I was born and brought up in India for first 16 years of my life. I come with a mixed heritage where my grandfather had English roots, my grandmother Portuguese roots, my dad, who was born and brought up in India, married to my mum, who's Indian. I'm Christian by faith, and married to my husband, who's Hindu and born and brought up in India. So as you can imagine, I have a very interesting heritage and a culture that is diverse. Myself and my mother moved to the UK about 20 so years ago when she secured a job as a nurse, and ever since UK has been our home. So that's me. And in terms of my education and things, absolutely, the only options in India that I had actually was to study maths, physics, chemistry when I was in equivalent to A levels and things. And the only career I could think about in that culture was engineering or being a doctor. So, but my passion lied somewhere else, and that was a different struggle that I had to kind of go down the path that I did and be in the financial services. But equally, studying those STEM subjects have helped me to get to where I've got to. But in terms of professional background, as Andy highlighted, most of it has been in financial services, where lately as a product owner, I found myself heavily involved in transformation programs. before I joined Atkins last year, January, to take my first steps in the engineering and construction sector, which has been amazing. And I've met some really brilliant people, and I'm learning things every single day. So I've always been interested in ED&I, equality, diversity and inclusion, as you can imagine, and developed a real passion for it over the years, having undertaken a number of voluntary roles in my previous employer. But I think the point where I moved from a supporter to an enabler was when I found myself in a roundtable conversation and heard first-hand experiences on challenges that people were facing in the workplace or generally in life. And that was, ethnic minorities, gender. And from there on, I threw myself into the ED&I space and was really delighted to secure this dedicated role within Atkins, where I lead, as Andy highlighted, equality, diversity, inclusion for UK and Europe region, ensuring that we deliver on this next strategy, and then it's delivered effectively as well. And at this point, I'm not going to shy away to mention that we have just been named one of the Times top 50 employers for women, but I certainly can't take all the credit for it. So now that's out of the way. In terms of discussion today, I hope I can offer some new perspectives from my past, especially from financial services, perhaps, and also fresh perspective on the engineering and construction sector. Clearly, there are differences in terms of diversity when banking, having access to a wider talent pool, in part to its relatively stable reputation, which offers a solid career in a safe office environment. These, of course, are perceptions, but nobody would deny perception is a very powerful thing. That said, there's no hiding away from the distinct lack of diversity in senior roles, a problem which transcends sectors and job types. Whilst I knew there was a lack of representation, I found that in construction engineering industry, only 27% of STEM workforce is female, and there's representation of ethnic minorities and disabled colleagues is also quite low, and that is a stark sort of contrast to what the wider workforce is compared to the STEM workforce. And gender equality has been an issue at every level across our industry. But when you look at senior roles, the comparative figures for ethnic minority and those with disabilities are also a real cause for concern and action. So what do we do? So what's the answer really here? And as with any complex issue, there simply isn't a silver bullet, But from my point of view, we need to focus on three core areas as we continue our journey to more diverse and inclusive workforce, and at all levels across our industry. Firstly, is around lived experiences. Roma touched on it, data, there is a whole drive around data, understanding our organization through data. But just listening to people, what experience they're having can really help you with the targeted actions and bring in some meaningful and sustainable change. And don't just look at the data in isolation. Think about the employee experience, your people experience, what is impacting what, how it's all connected. I would encourage you to do that. Collaboration is my second point. This problem doesn't sit with just one person, function, boardroom. We all have a role to play. Business case has been made. I find it amusing when people still ask question, why do we need to be bothered about AD&I? I would encourage you to start reading and researching and building your awareness and knowledge if it hasn't been done enough through everything that's going on in across all industry and sectors. But challenges, how do we move from this awareness part or understanding part to real change and achieving that mass numbers, people driving it, not just fair few, a mass majority driving this agenda and really making a difference. And the final point I want to make around focus of areas around inclusive and trusted leadership. Leaders that are taking personal responsibility for the creation of inclusive culture. And, from my perspective, inclusive leadership is essentially the input to get to the trusted leadership. And inclusive leadership will only take you so far. You need leaders who are trusted. But amongst all this, we mustn't take the eye off retention. I really listened to what Roma said about her experiences, you know, and her career change, in even Anjali's point around, you know, how things, what are the barriers, what's being taught. We really need to understand better why people leave a profession they were once attracted to and worked very hard to be part of. It's not easy to go through and study these subjects and achieve everything and then work. I looked at some statistics through Royal Academy of Engineering and found 57% of female engineers drop off the register under the age of 45 compared to only 17% of male engineers. So what is it? Is it the culture? So it's all good bringing diverse talent in, but what are you going to do to fix the culture so they feel they belong and they actually stay? So while talent attraction is extremely important, so is retention from my perspective. And we have to think about this against the backdrop of a changing industry, one which is becoming more digital and in need of new skills, which Anjali and Andy talked about. How is this impacting the diversity and inclusion? In the last year, we had all of a sudden to change, you know, a lot of us actually, our ways of working, and remote working became a thing for many of us. So is this the burning platform we needed to bring in the increased flexibility in this sector? Can remote working facilitate retention of women and minorities who are often shouldered with disproportionate share of family duties? Will that widen the access to an array of diverse talent that may not have been available to companies previously? So anyway, these are some of my thoughts, and I look forward to expanding on some of these ideas during the course of discussion. Thank you, Andy. I'll pause there.
Thanks very much, Sandra, for that contribution. I think a couple of points I pulled out of there. Well, there was a lot in there actually, and we won't get to it all in the discussion. There's loads of questions coming in the chat already, so please keep them coming through. But how do we mainstream this was coming through to me there. The role of leadership, particularly at the top of our industry as well, which is, I don't think, something that can be ignored. You know, when it comes to all aspects of diversity, fixing the culture, very, very important. But also this concept of retention. It's not just about recruitment, it's about retention as well. What about those people who leave the industry? Why do they leave the industry? I know that's something in the future that Atkins is doing some work on, and hopefully they'll share that with the industry, you know, over the coming months. But, you know, we know that the industry does lose people. I mean, all industries lose people for all sorts of reasons, but we know that the construction sector has a particular challenge with retention. And I think that's something, again, that, you know, we need to look at. And maybe it's the first time I've heard the pandemic called a burning platform, but nevertheless, you know, I think the point you make is a valid one in relation to that. Anyway, we've got to move on because we don't want to run out of time, and we want to make sure that we've got plenty of opportunity to ask our panelists some questions a little bit later on. Our next speaker is Verity Barr, who is a director of the communications consultancy BECG. Verity leads the Birmingham office of BECG and has a lot of experience, 20 years in fact, of developing and delivering integrated strategic and creative communications campaigns for all kinds of businesses that are involved in the built environment. And she's delivered a number of award-winning media relations campaigns and communications and placemaking campaigns across our sector. So Verity, your turn next.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. I also want to start today by sharing a bit about my story and my background, and I think straight away that'll highlight exactly the reason why the debate that we're having today is so important. So I pretty much breezed straight through school and university. I walked straight into my first graduate job. I've had the pick of kind of roles and career options and opportunities that I wanted to since then. And I've never felt that a door has been closed to me. I've never felt that there was an opportunity presented to me that I couldn't take up. And I've never felt unwelcome in an environment where I've wanted to be and work. And as a result, I've personally never felt that this sector isn't for me. and that is absolutely how it should be for everyone, regardless of their skin color or background. And I'm very conscious that those opportunities have predominantly come to me because I am a white person. And that's absolutely not good enough, and it's not the way it should be. So I think you're right, and I think a couple of the points that Roma and Anjali particularly have made, you know, how do we address this? How do we fix the system, and how do we rebrand our sector so that I am not in the minority in feeling that way, and not in the minority of having that experience. And I think that question of how do we change the sector is such a massive challenge, and it almost feels like quite an overwhelming starting point, because it's such a big kind of tide to turn. So the way that I've tried to approach it, and I think similar in a way to some of the points that Anjali made, is I'm trying to ask myself a different question. So instead of saying, how can I help change the sector, I'm trying to ask, how can I change myself as an individual? What is within my kind of power and reach to do? Because I think, you know, thinking of kind of the theory of marginal gains, if you like, is if all of us within the sector in this position make a few small changes together, kind of collectively, we can have a big impact, and we can start to turn the tide. So, you know, over the last couple of years, and I guess particularly over the last year, having had a bit of time for introspection, I've really started to think, you know, what can I do? What is within my reach? And I think there are kind of two aspects to what I'm challenging myself to do. There's thinking about how I create change as an employer, as a recruiter, which I guess starts to feed into Roma's point about how do we fix the system, but also how do I, as a communications professional, start to change the way that the sector presents itself. So I guess, again, kind of picking up on Anjali's point about how we rebrand ourselves. So just firstly, picking up on the first of those points, as an employer and a recruiter, what is within my capability and my power to change. And I'm really lucky that I work for a very considerate, very forward-thinking, progressive organisation, and driving real change in diversity, inclusion, and inclusivity is a kind of core tenet of BECG's vision organisation, really. And very simply, what the company is trying to do is drill down into two particular aspects that we think we can and should improve. So first of all is looking at how we proactively encourage applicants from underrepresented groups, so the diversity side of it. But again, touching on something that Anjali said, alongside that, we're also looking at how we create an equitable environment within our organisation, so that when people from underrepresented groups join us, they absolutely feel on a par with everybody else, that they feel welcomed, they feel included, that they feel able to be their best selves and therefore do their best work. So therefore looking at the inclusivity side of it as well, because, you know, I think the two are intrinsically linked. You can't have D without without the I. If you only focus on D, you become a tick box exercise, and as Roma said so eloquently, that ultimately doesn't achieve anything. You know, we have to have both of those together. So again, coming back to, you know, us as an organisation, how are we changing and trying to drive that change? We admit that we don't know everything, and that we don't know everything about how to do this, and we're not the experts. And I think that's a kind of critical first step. So we are looking over the next 12 months at tackling three particular sectors where we believe we can make kind of meaningful change, albeit in the first instance that may be fairly small steps, but those are small steps to something bigger. So we're focusing particularly on BAME representation, on neurodiversity, which I think is an aspect of the diversity story that perhaps doesn't get as strong a voice as it could and should do, and also physical disability. And within each of those areas, we're starting out by engaging with and talking to the experts who really understand the nuances and the challenges specific to those groups, so that we can then really fully understand what we need to do to support those groups and actively increase their engagement. So just to give a couple of examples, now we've recently started talking to an organisation called the Taylor Bennett Foundation, that it is specifically, the specific objective is encouraging young BAME graduates to consider careers in the communications sector, so admittedly not construction specifically, but communications. And we're hoping to form a partnership with them, which will facilitate us being able to encourage more applicants into our recruitment process. We're also working with a body called the Genius Within, who are specialists in the field of neurodiversity, to look at how we ensure that through the work that we do for our clients, and that we ourselves are facilitating neurodivergent thinkers, and again ensuring that everybody is able to participate and work to the best of their ability. And then, just as an aside, another area that we here haven't touched on yet, but another of our team 4 or 5 years ago started a group called Planning Out, which is a membership group for the LGBT community working within the planning sector. So again, picking up, I think, on what Sandra said, that's about giving people a voice and an opportunity to discuss their shared experiences, and then use that to drive change through a sector. And that group now has almost 1,000 members in and around London. And just yesterday we were starting to talk about how do we launch that group in other areas, particularly in Birmingham, where I'm kind of leading the work, because that is hugely important, as well as the work that we're doing as a recruiter. And alongside that, on the inclusivity side of things, how do we change that within our organisation? Again, just as a starting point and just as one example, we are rolling out unconscious bias training for all staff. And in fact, that is actually going to become part of our induction process, so that right from day one, any employee that joins our organisation understands the importance of inclusivity, and the fact that it will just be a given within our organisation that they are expected to behave in that way, but also to understand perhaps some of their unconscious biases and how they need to potentially change their behaviour to overcome some of those and play their role in this inclusive organisation. And then just quickly, Andy, because I know you're conscious of time, but just wanting to touch on that second aspect of my own challenge to myself of how I, as a comms professional, can support change through the sector. I'm really conscious that I have a role to play in how the sector presents itself. And at the moment, I think we're all agreed that we're not presenting ourselves in the right way. So I've kind of taken on a personal challenge to challenge both myself and my clients to think about how we present ourselves differently and think about how we tell our stories differently. So again, just to give a couple of really simple tactics, that the first thing I'm trying to do is get people to acknowledge that the best spokesperson isn't always the most senior person within the organisation, because as Sandra said, within our sector, the most senior people are very often the white middle-aged men, and they are not going to inspire the young female graduate to join the sector. So actually, should we be giving the voice to that young female graduate as a spokesperson for some, to tell some stories for us? Because actually, she may well be passionate about change. She may well be passionate about changing the sector, and that's the voice that we need to be sharing, that other young girls need to be seeing. But what's also really important is that as we give voices to a wider, more representative group of people within our sector, we need to stop presenting them as a novelty. We need to stop talking about, oh, here's a woman working in construction. And we need to start talking about, here's a person doing a really interesting job and doing it very well, who happens to be a woman. We just need to make it part of the fact, and not the novelty. And I think that's because, it needs to be fact, because every sector, and not just ours, benefits from diversity. I don't think anybody would disagree that diverse teams, in the broadest sense of the definition of diversity, make far better teams, and that's what we should collectively be striving for, because it's to the benefit, not the detriment of all of us, that happens.
Thanks very much, Verity, for that. Interesting as well what you spoke there about working with different types of organisations as well, because I think that's important for the industry in achieving a diverse feedback and a diverse experience as well. And often that's best gained, when you actually do start talking to organisations that represent different groups. It was good as well to hear you mention the LGBT community as well, because I know that there are a number of consulting firms in particular, but I'm sure there's many firms throughout our sector who are actually doing some excellent work in that particular area as well. And I think that that needs to be recognised also, and equally you flagging up neurodiversity as well, which I think is an area that's not often looked at, frankly, and is one that definitely needs more attention, not just in our sector, but I think in society as a whole as well. So I'm sure, again, there are questions coming in the chat around a number of these issues, and we'll get to them after our final panelist, who is Amos Simbo, who is the director of the M&E Fit Out Specialists, Winway Consultants. He's also a founder of Black Professionals in Construction, and the BPIC network is a platform, one of those representative organizations I spoke about just a couple of minutes ago, a platform for Black and ethnic minority professionals in the built and natural environment, who have had some significant successes in the recent period in terms of building their organization, which I'm sure Amos will probably mention at some point during the course of the next 7 to 10 minutes. Amos, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andy, and hi everyone. My name is Amos. As Andy mentioned, I run a construction M&E company, as well as Black Professionals in Construction. So I'll just give you a sort of brief overview of how I got here and what it's been like so far. So I did mechanical engineering over at Loughborough, and unlike any other sort of construction courses, it was sort of hard sort of engine type engineering, which I think I was good at, but I found really difficult to actually do. So yeah, finished the course and graduated. And in between that, I had a few internships with the likes of Rolls-Royce and National Grid, etc. But I think it's just the fact that I just didn't particularly enjoy it at all. And the fact that I wasn't much good at it, because it didn't really make it any better. So when I finished university, I'd done some internships with some fruit guys for about 2 weeks, and that's some of the stuff I had on my CV, and I got a job with a company called Intech. So that was my first experience with construction, and I knew nothing about it, like zero. So I was pleasantly surprised, because I actually enjoyed it. Like literally, going into the industry, I actually realized, oh, this is what I actually like, because most of the things I was going for, the internships I did, was just because you had to apply. Companies coming to campus and they say, can you apply for this? And then you just go for it. But really, to be honest, I can't remember who mentioned it. When you're young, people ask you what you want to do for a career, but the honest truth is about 60% have got absolutely no clue what they want to do. No matter what you tell them, they just don't know. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to make that decision like then. And then for me, coming in, really, really liked it. Did part of the Olympics, and I don't know, for some reason it just struck me, the fact that no one had ever told me about it. That there's opportunities like this, within the construction world, what we could do. And I would say, my journey, looking back, perhaps was challenging, but at the time I was going through it, it was quite straightforward. Got the job. And I was kind of just plowing through. People that really helped me, especially I think 2 or 3 companies in. I'd really, good guy that really mentored me. He just sort of said, follow me for a year. He was a director and gave me so much insight about how the full cycle of the actual industry works. And I can reflect now, but at the time I didn't know that I was actually being mentored. I just thought this guy just wants me to follow him and just do, some of the work with him. And he literally used to ask me to physically get my, hands on, because most of the university graduates that you see, I'm talking from my own experience, they don't know what they're looking at, when they come into areas of work. Most of the stuff you're doing is in a workshop, I guess, really small scale, or in a book. So when you actually go on site, say you could ask a graduate to point to anything, they probably won't be able to, because on site it's much bigger and doesn't look like what it did in the textbook. So for me, that was the really good experience I've got. And then fast forward up to now, I start Winway Consultants based on the fact that I was just frustrated with some of the standards in the industry in terms of install. And for me, I was like, well, if that's the standard, I guess I could do it. And that's the story. There's no other sort of inspirational story more than that. And yeah, it's been great so far. And through the networks I've built, managed to sort of get into the industry. But then again, recently, towards, I think 2019, I started meeting some of my colleagues that were having issues with the industry, talking about how they find it difficult to navigate, et cetera, et cetera. And it might sound surprising to you, but I had never seen that side of things. Sometimes you're just sort of blinded to actually what's going on. I just took it as normal that I'll be the only Black guy. I just thought, that's it, that's normal. I just never actually considered it could be better, or I don't know if it makes sense. But just, so when my friends started saying I'm having difficulties, I was like, what? Because, on a usual normal basis in good times, you get recruiters in your inbox like 5 times a week, So when my friends were saying I can't get a job, I was like, how come? Like, these recruiters are literally desperate for people, and you can't get a job. So for me, I had to sort of dig deep. So essentially started to go into inclusion networks to find out like what is diversity and inclusion, and I used to go to all sectors, banking, finance, any sector, any event I'd just go on Eventbrite and sort of pick an event and say, let me go and have a look. And initially, the feel I got with all these networks I used to go to, this was in 2019, so perhaps before the emphasis was sort of drilled down with the whole BLM movement. It just felt like people were just there to sort of, kind of go through what they've already spoken about, or sometimes people just having a drink. So I'd literally essentially go to ask people, in the event to say, why did you come here? And they just be like, well, I feel like, I could just come and meet someone like me, or like just to come and drink. I don't know. There wasn't really any sort of specific. So at the time I was like, can we, make this better? That's where, with Black professionals in construction, we really sort of started to find out what can we do better in our industry. And without, going into like too much detail, and fast forward, we've grown as an organization, etc. But there's a few things for me that just struck me with the industry itself. And some of the points was, we keep saying we've got a long way to go, but like, how long is that way? Like, how long is it? How many more years are we going to be talking about this? And who's going to decide what speed we're going at? Like, to actually get to that point. Like, if you actually ask that question, people just don't know. Like, they just kind of leave it to somebody else. Like, it could be to the industry body or to the government or to people. Nobody's really just taking the responsibility to say, for us, we're just gonna, take this on board. So for me, that's, one of the questions, I had. And secondly was to looking at, I think we spoke about the industry talent, to say, one thing that struck me is the industry, it sort of blames the schools to say, yeah, we go to schools now, I don't know what's happening to their students. They're just not coming. So it's almost like putting the blame somewhere else to say, you say, oh, what do you do to attract more people? I'm not saying it's bad to go to schools, by the way. I'm just saying the usual answer is we go to schools, like almost saying between us and the school, something was going wrong, but it might actually be the school's fault as well, But then nobody actually looks within the industry itself, So it's like inviting someone to your house for a party, but then your house is a whole mess, and then you wonder why people don't come, after like 2 or 3, and you keep saying, why are they not coming now? But you don't actually look inside your house, and that's the industry for us. If you look, the whole industry is what's stopping people coming in, like full stop. There's nobody else. And what I mean by the whole industry is, the way the industry is actually run on its own, the personnel that we have leading the industry, and by run, I mean, this sort of the transparency within the industry, the way things are tended, that is always like a race to the bottom, like with all the competitive pricing and all that sort of stuff. The way, there isn't a mixture of actual, gender, talent, ethnicity, all that sort of stuff. The way, the mental health aspect of the industry, like every day you're faced with a program and you have to finish tomorrow or yesterday, like all that is that's the industry that we actually live in. And that's what's stopping everyone coming in. And if you look at the fact that there's such a huge gender skew, let's say amongst, let's say, I'm not sure what the stats are, but it's heavily male dominated, yeah, and males from a certain ethnicity. Amongst the population of the UK, you're essentially getting talent from about 5 or 10% of the population, yeah, because that's what you're tapping into like all the time, yeah. And then you wonder why there's a shortage of talent, because you're just looking from literally like you're essentially fishing into 10% of the population, right? And not widening it. So for me, the issues are obvious, but what struck me is how the industry itself seems to just be like oblivious, which makes me think, is this really oblivious or just kind of like intentional? Because you can clearly see what the issues are, and obviously we talk about, I'm not really going to repeat what everybody said. We all know what the issues are, how we're looking to address it, how we're looking to be more inclusive, the debates, the talks that we have. But then what you look at that, and then the company says, yeah, we want to be more inclusive talent. But for example, you look at the organizations, preferred supplier list for talent, and all the recruiters on there, they don't really recruit from diverse backgrounds. So it's kind of like, do you just want to talk about it? Or, when it comes to the actual action to say, okay, now look at that talent, where you're getting it from? Because at the end of the day, that's where you're going to get the talent from. And because of the nature of the industry, it's so fast paced that when you're looking for that talent, it has to come tomorrow, and you just go to the same person, right? And they just give you the same. And the easiest talent to find is sort of like white male talent. That's what's easy to find, because a few clicks on LinkedIn, that's what comes up, right? And because the industry is so fast paced, that's what you keep getting. And if you're not changing that, that's what you're just going to keep, no matter what you do. Like, you can talk all you want. That's why I said initially, how long are we in this for this journey? To say things are going to get better. Like how long is it? Because until those real changes are being made, then all we're doing is, everybody gets it. Like, everybody know inclusion is good. There's been reports made about it. There's been everything you can think about. Now there's BLM that's also been made about it. So I don't think nobody actually understands it, apart from a few extremes. But we already know what it is. Now it's like, what are the actions that you're doing? And that's what, and also, when hiring at senior level, there's never been a lot of minorities. So when you're looking for them, you're gonna find people that have never been there because they've never been given a chance. So you're probably gonna get like a 7 out of 10 who can be easily 8 or 9 in about 6 months. So you can't be looking for something that's not there because it's actually not there. So it's a case of, as an organization, give them a chance to actually start, as an industry, start building that. Just going and saying they're not good enough, of course they're not. Like, they've never been there. If you've got a boardroom full of, let's say, 10 guys, and you want a woman there, there's never been a woman in that space. So you're not going to say we need a woman that's been qualified to be in that space when there's never. So you just kind of, give it a chance. And it's to say, the last point is to say, who's actually responsible for this? You get sometimes industry bodies saying we can't really do much because the contractors are independent, and then you go to the contractors, they say, oh, we're just waiting for the industry bodies to sort of deal with it. So it's not who's responsible. Like, as diversity can start feeling like a tennis ball. You're just in between everyone. So it's like, as an organization, just take that responsibility. So I hope, without going into too much of it, that kind of gives an insight of what I've been, what's brought me here, and how can we better change the conversation to actually make it more meaningful, and the dial needs to start moving, at some point, because the conversations are good, and I think we all get it. So yeah, thanks for that, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Amos. And a number of people have commented in the chat about how appreciative they are of people being open and in some cases frank, with what they've been saying. And I think that's excellent, for the event. I'm going to get straight into the questions because we've got quite a lot, and I'll make an appeal to our panelists to be as brief as possible so that we can get as many of the questions in as possible. It's always the way with these events. We run out of time and basically have too many questions, but that's because we have such great panels. So it's your fault type of thing. But anyway, we'll get to the first question from Noble Francis, who says, very interesting discussion so far. How do the panelists think is the best way to get systems, processes and cultures to change in construction? Are there quick wins, or is significant change in construction diversity necessarily reliant on long-term major structural changes in the industry? I know that's a big question, but I want people to be brief. So if I can ask Sandra, first of all, for her view on that. Are there quick wins, or is it massive? Is it almost, is it too big?
I think I was really, I totally support that system point. I think you need to look inside with Anjali, you need to look inwardly, really understand the system that you have. And that takes a bit of time. So you need to invest the time to understand your system, and then listen to your people who are going through that system as well, to what their experience is through that system. Because just looking at it from a few people's view is not going to help you. You need to be looking through the views of others and lived experiences. So yeah, look at your system, but through the voices of your employees. Thank you, Andy.
Cheers. Anjali, what's your view on that?
Yes, I think one quick win, going back to my point about the 10% versus 90%, we have 90% of people out there kind of on site doing the more tertiary roles. Whenever anybody goes to site, you have to do like a pre-enrollment. Well, most of the sites I've been to, you have to anyway. So it could be small things like including inclusion videos into these videos, so that people are just getting general awareness, because I feel like those 90% people don't even know about the inclusion conversations and what it really is about. They're hearing the words and they're just rolling their eyes, oh gosh, one of those again. But if they understand what it is that diversity is, they'll realize soon enough, I'm in those boxes too. We're all diverse people, no matter where we're coming from. So implementing things site level is really fundamental. You're on mute, Andy.
Yes, who knew that there was such a thing? But anyway, I just want to turn to Roma, maybe to address some of that question, but also just reflecting on when I first contacted you to go on this panel, you said you were a little bit hesitant about appearing on the panel, or indeed any other D&I panel. Can you share a little bit about why that was?
So my very quick response to the previous question is just assume that there is discrimination in your organization. It still astounds me to this day that organizations think they're perfect and think that there's nothing going wrong. Every single one of us is sexist and racist and homophobic in our own ways, because we have grown up in society, and we have to improve ourselves. So start from the assumption that you need to learn. Why I was hesitant: I'm an engineer. I studied engineering. I wanted to be an engineer. And that's all I ever planned to in my career. I am not a D&I expert. I'm not a people manager. I'm not in HR. These discussions have been going on for years. And frankly, having to constantly keep sharing the same topics can get painful. Like, I had a whole list. I have a list of things that have happened to me that are racist and sexist during my career. And it's just painful having to kind of go through that stuff all the time. And so that's why I'm always a bit like, oh, a D&I panel. But at the same time, and the biggest one is I'm always concerned, and Anjali touched on this, about what the impact on my future career is, because people already have an assumption about who I am. And now I will be seen as a troublemaker, that person who's always going on about this and that and causing us problems. So, that's always really on the forefront of my head as well. The reason I then decided to join you today and to do selected other ones is because I am a brown woman who, relatively speaking, in our industry has a little bit of power, because I am reasonably well known to some people. I can be seen as a role model, and I have broken out of our industry to do more things. And I just think that anybody that has, it's Peter Parker, a bit of Peter Parker. With great power comes great responsibility.
Thanks for that. What's your view on that question, Amos, in terms of, do we need massive systemic change, or are there some quick wins that that the industry and firms within it could implement?
For me, a quick win would essentially be like, if you're in a company that's having, if you have a PSL or where your talent is coming from, just go and include an organization that's going to get you diverse talent as well. Just get them included on that list, whatever it is, be it a PSL or just a normal list of talent providers. Put one there. I mean, that's a quick win for me. But I do, in addition to what everybody else has said, because that list is, you're essentially going to be, doing the talking and everything, but you're still getting the same supply. And whilst you're thinking about it and considering it for the next 6 months to a year, that whole year you could have done so much change. So look at it, even if you just, doesn't mean you have to give all your talent them, just making them aware to say, we got these talent opportunities, who do you have, who can come, or like advertise them, or whatever you can do. For me, that's a quick win, because that list is like a list or a mailing list that can go out. So for me, that would be a quick win. If you really want to change something on Tuesday, do that. Just go and look at the list where you're getting talent from, and at least you can get the conversation started. Because
thanks.
Just again, you can actually within an organization where the grade looks are, etc.
Thanks, Amos. You're just breaking up a little bit there, but that's fine. We got the gist of what you were saying. I just want to turn to Verity, but I want to sort of give a slightly different take on things and get to another question as well. It's just otherwise we'll run out of time. The really interesting point made in the chat, I won't name him because, well, I mean, I could do, but he says, I'm a default man, white, middle-aged, straight, boring. I think I have a duty and a responsibility to help to improve things. It would be really helpful to check in with the panel on what the obvious thing for people like me to get right and do are. And I'll pose that first to Verity, if I may.
So I think kind of first point to make is, if we are, truly talking about diversity and inclusivity, then, there is a place for male, pale and stale within that somewhere, I guess. But I think in terms of coming, being part of this debate as a white person, and, as my lived experience showed, I come from a very different starting point, I think is to not assume that we can understand and empathize with other experiences that people have had. And I think therefore to go to experts and groups who understand the underrepresented group that we need to bring into the sector is really critical to better understand the nuances and the support and the challenges that some groups are going through. Oh, sorry, Nick, you're not stale as well. I've just seen the comment come through. Yeah, I think go to the experts and seek advice. Now I'm completely distracted. Lost my train of thought.
No jokes in the chat.
Sorry, Andy, bring me back to the point that you want me to make. Sorry.
Yeah, it was basically, what can people like the person who keeps cracking jokes in the chat? What should they be doing? But also the bigger, the bigger issue is how does the industry change, and what are the quick wins and big changes really?
So I think coming at it from my role as a comms professional, a really quick win is thinking about the content that companies put out. As you said, Andy, the huge increase in social media channels and digital communications allows us to react and respond really quickly to different situations. This is something that we can do, today, tomorrow. Companies can start posting content that is inclusive. They can start giving those voices to different people within the organization. They can start presenting the sector as a more diverse and welcoming place. And I think that's something that could and should be happening, straight away. There's almost no excuse for not doing that really quickly.
Thanks, Verity. There's an interesting question in the chat from Sarah Maffey, who talks about, I think it's partly, I suppose, the experience that we've had over the last year with the pandemic and how that's changed. And asking a question about, could normalizing homework be a way of including particularly women and disabled people more in the industry, and also focusing on the work instead of office politics? I mean, what do people think about that? And I'll pose that one first to Anjali. Do you have a view on that?
By normalizing homework, do you mean, just want clarity on that, do you mean for?
I think homeworking, basically.
Oh, homeworking, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I meant homeworking, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So in terms of homeworking, there are benefits to it because, like the question says, you will get away from the office politics, but I still don't think it will address the problems that we have. And so by just saying, okay, work from home, it's fine, everything's going to be okay, no one's going to be able to see you, if you then have to go back into that working world, is the problem still going to be there? So it's going to be a balance of both. And, you know, sometimes, for example, I get seen as or taken as a male through emails. Then when I meet somebody, they're then shocked to see that I'm a female. So again, I think the problems will still be there, although it does help in the short term.
Okay, Sandra, thanks for that. Sandra, do you have a view on that? Is that something, you know, as you sort of, you know, look at how Atkins in particular is going to be working going forward post-pandemic, this whole rise of homework, and is there something there? You called it a burning platform earlier in relation to the pandemic, but is there something there that could actually, you know, lead to change and a better way of working in our sector?
I mean, it's definitely going to help from my point of view, Andy. You know, it is going to give people flexibility that this sector really needs, and opportunities. But I think, you know, we need to think about how do we bring in, now we've got, like, you know, social value, we've got net zero, we've got carbon I lose the word, but there's so many things, global challenges that we're trying to fix. How do we bring in opportunities or educate the younger generation or the people that not just the front line is where you have to be in the mix of things to deliver in this industry. There are other roles where you can contribute, and that could come with that flexibility and home working and things. So I think there is that whole piece of bringing that awareness about what other opportunities are there, rather than just saying every job that you can do it from home or part of it from home. So that's my point of view. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Sandra. I just want to turn to Roma, and you know, I don't want to pick out you know, any particular area of the workforce, but I think, you know, it would be remiss if on a panel where we've actually got the majority of women, if I'm not counted as a panelist, and please don't count me as one, that you know, this question of women's involvement in our industry. I know that in the past you've talked about openly talked about your IVF treatment and pregnancy. Can you sort of reflect a little bit on how best employers can support people in situations like that?
Yeah, thank you. So it also ties into this question about the flexibility. So I knew that I was going to embark on this treatment. I didn't know how hard it was going to be. Like, I knew it would be hard, but until you actually do it, it's impossible to know what a huge emotional and physical impact it has on you. I remember calling for a meeting with my manager and standing outside the room thinking, oh, I'm about to torpedo my career, because I chose to be open about it and to tell him that I was about to undergo IVF. So it's like, not only am I putting myself through this big physical and mental thing, but hopefully at the end of it, I might be pregnant and then on maternity leave and all of that stuff. I did it. I'm really glad that I did. He was absolutely brilliant. But he had somebody in his family who had been through it. So he had a direct understanding of the situation. And the working flexibly really saved me, because I had dozens of appointments. I had injections. I had all this medication I had to take. During my pregnancy, I was throwing up 8 to 10 times a day. I had absolutely appalling sickness. And I had to sleep in the middle of the day. And frankly, I wouldn't have been able to work at all if I had to go into the office on a daily basis. In a broader view, although I got amazing support from that company, they didn't have a policy in place to support people going through fertility treatments. And that is one thing I discussed with them and that I know that they're now looking at. But that's again, talking about quick wins, there's another quick win. 1 in 6 couples will go through fertility issues, and having a company policy in place to reassure them that they'll be safe and looked after would really help in the long term with the mental health.
Thanks very much, Roma, for that. I just want to try and get to some, you know, to some more questions before we wrap up. I think what we're hearing, you know, from all of our panelists and also in the chat, is that basically employers, you know, need to engage. Obviously, I mean, they do engage with their staff, but sometimes people just don't understand, you know, what's going on in people's, you know, a number of people use the phrase lived experiences. And, you know, I think in you know, the last year's taught us anything, where hopefully people have started to reach out a bit more and check in with people and find out how they are. It's okay not to be okay. The concept of all of that. I hope that that we will move towards a more tolerant society. I hope, and I hope that's not a pipe dream, and I hope that's reflected in our industry as well, because I think it's something that we need to be moving towards. There's a question from the panel, looking at how do we promote EDI in construction. What's your view on the concept of social procurement and social value? Something that we've covered quite extensively at Infrastructure Intelligence. We had a conference on it about a month or so ago. Is there a route there to lever EDI, as a result of the whole social value agenda, particularly when the government is actually behind it? And if I just start with Amos first on that, do you have a view on that, whether the whole move towards social value, can actually assist us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good tool to use. I've been seeing a lot of that, quite a lot since last year with the likes of HS2, etc., and all the other sort of regeneration programs going on. It's a good to have because a lot of our industry, as much as we talk about wanting to do good things, is led by what's good for the business. So, essentially at the end of the day, all these companies are builders, and they'll do what's good for builders, like as in to make money and to keep building again and again. So putting these tools, these mechanisms inside, like from the top, the mechanisms to push people to aid in those through the tendering processes, social value, etc. You're essentially bringing the change in a way that not forcing it, but you're kind of forcing it, but by enforcing it to make sure it happens. So I think it's good too. However, when it's being implemented, I think people implementing it should also be realistic. So for example, there's been lately a measure to have more diverse, built environment organizations within the supply chain, for example. But then when you ask the people that are writing those policies, but where are those companies? I mean, do you know where to even find them? Because you can't just Google, like to say minority, like what's the best place to go there? They'll say, oh, we don't know, but we just say go and find them. But I feel like having that visibility from the policy writers, the people that enforcing the social value element, to say, do you actually know the demographic of all these companies across the UK? Because what contractors will end up just doing to win the tender is just telling you stories, to say, yeah, we found one, we're going to be working with 5, etc. So it's such a flawed system, like, because a contractor will give you an answer if you need one, to win a project. Like we can all write stuff, but then in reality, they just don't know anybody. They're like, oh, we don't know. And in reality, some of these minority-owned organizations, if you're building a stadium, for example, and you say, oh, your supply chain for all the guys that are pouring concrete should be diverse, some of these companies don't even exist, like in the world. So it's good. It's a good mechanism, but it's also to say, let's do a bit of research as well into what's actually out there. Because if you leave it to the contractors, you think things are happening when they're not. And I'm not just, I'm not just pointing at contractors here, but the honest truth is that's what happens. In all those tenders, they're just full of stuff. Some of them doesn't even exist, and that includes myself. I'm not saying that's what I do, but I'm just saying I'm in that pool as well. But what I'm just saying is it's a very good tool mechanism, but I wish the policymakers, kind of dug deep to say, but if it's social value, we want it applicable to these sort of, packages, for example, or to these roles. That's where we know, those minority-owned businesses are. I'm just giving you an example. So it's good with a bit of research behind it, Andy. You're mute again.
He's done it again. What's he like? Yeah, thanks very much for that. We're going to have to end with a final question, I'm afraid, because we've kind of run out of time. So I'm just going to pull one, sort of out of my head, really, and that is to ask, and this is in no way to try and sort of sort of sum things up too much, but what do you think? How do you think the industry is dealing with this? With the challenge of diversity and inclusion, and what does it need to do? Going forward. I know that's a big kind of question. I'm going to ask you to sort of answer it very succinctly, but it's almost like what should the industry be doing this as we move forward on this particular issue. And if I start with Anjali to address that.
I think first of all, everybody's working in small bubbles. So there's all these conversations going on, smaller bubbles, smaller things happening. But I think for the industry to make real change and implement big change, I think all those small bubbles, those small companies kind of need to come together and do something kind of succinctly. And then I think we'll be able to attain bigger milestones and achievements.
Thanks very much, Anjali. Sandra, your view on that?
Thank you, Andy. I think a few points actually, and I'll take my time over it, but still keep it brief. I think the industry is definitely, I can see the passion, I can see the desire and enthusiasm that there is to make a difference. But in terms of what more can be done, I think younger generation, there's a lot of work, but when are we, the point's been well made in this conversation itself, what are we doing to engage them at the early ages? But what I would add is we need to start showcasing some unusual career journeys. It doesn't have to be, this is what you need to be able to do this, because the transferable skills, the talent, the analytical thinking, you need to think about the skills and then think about how you bring that alive, rather than just sticking to, if you have a degree, then you have a career in this sector. The other thing which Anjali made, the collaboration, I can't stress enough on that. Amos referred to this, we're fighting in the same talent pool. So by looking at what requirements we're putting in front of our graduates to come into the sector, what kind of job description we're pulling together, I think that would help eliminate some of the barriers. And what kind of process do we put in front of them, and how do we support some of the ethnic minorities or underrepresented groups to be better supported to go through this selection process when they try and enter the sector. And then thirdly, I want to talk about targets. Yes, there is a lot of debate and contention around it, but you need it to measure the success. But you need to have program of interventions, really be clear what you're trying to achieve alongside those targets, and mobilizing it and making it everyone's business that they need to support and get there. And finally, the point that I've kind of hammered on today is about lived experiences. You're not going to go there on your own. You can't fix the problem. You need to build a mass. You need to listen to people's lived experiences and use the guidance and expertise that Verity referred to make a difference. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed, Sandra. Verity, your brief comments on how you think the industry is addressing these questions and what it needs to do.
I think completely agree and echo what Anjali and Sandra have said. But as well as that, I think we need to think differently about this as well, and actually come at this from the standpoint of that a diverse team is a better team, and that delivers huge advantage to us as a sector. And again, I come back to the point that diversity in its broadest sense, so in terms of gender, sexuality, ways of thinking, skin color as well. And I think if we can look at it as a real positive, that diversity is hugely positive, then that will hopefully encourage more and more people to change the way that they behave and change the way they think and what they're doing, because they'll see and understand the benefit that brings as well.
Thanks, Verity. Amos, your view on what do you think? What would you like to see the industry do more of in this particular area?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think these conversations are really fantastic, and I think it's edging things in the right direction as well. Getting that momentum, like Anjali said. If we build that momentum together, it will actually help all of us to sort of come together within the industry. What I would also say is, let's try and just keep it simple. Just keep it really, really simple to where the issues are. Listening to stories is good, but if you listen to stories forever, you just listen to horror stories now. Like you're just watching a movie. And you're probably enjoying it. So you can listen, but I get it now. Let's just not keep listening to stories. Let's just keep simplifying the issue. Like if you look at it, we talk about all these, but at the end of the day, these are just people in society that need a job to feed their family. That's it. So, we could say they need a report, financial report, etc. That's just ways of trying to justify employing someone, right? Who's just someone in society paying their taxes and all that. That's the simple fact. If you look at it, if you strip everything away, someone just needs a job to feed their family, and that's it. And they're paying tax, they're not committing any crime, and they're just struggling to find a job. And all these mechanisms we're utilizing for us to have the discussions, to have the financial reports or the benefits of diversity is just a way of trying to justify employing someone at the end of the day. So if we just try and simplify the issue, I feel like we inch much further. Although with conversations like this, I feel like we're going in the right direction. I'm really happy I contributed to this today.
And so we, Amos, as well. Finally, last but not least, Roma, some closing comments on that issue from yourself.
Start in the end, no pressure.
Indeed, sorry about that.
So I want to zoom in because I echo everything. I don't want to repeat what everyone else has said. I agree with everything. I'm going to zoom in on a really discrete point. So the Sewell Report, which came out and stated that the UK has no problem with institutional racism. I cried the day that came out because A, it's utter nonsense. B, it's now given people an excuse to not do anything. It was a very deeply devastating report for me to look at. And I wondered, so I wasn't at an employer's at the time. I can assure you that I'm not the only person that felt utterly devastated by that report coming out. And I wonder how many employers said something to their staff or said, you know what, we disagree with this. We know that we have systemic issues and we're going to deal with it. And that would have been a hugely, hugely meaningful thing that companies could have done. If you've done it, amazing, great work. But I'm pretty sure there's very few, if any, that made any encouraging comments or offered support to their staff off the back of that.
Thanks very much, Roma, and thanks for mentioning the Sewell Report, because that was on my list and I forgot to mention it. Because I obviously work in the media and communication sector, and equally there was people who in my networks who were absolutely incredulous at the conclusions of that report, and I think it was quite deservedly criticised in many quarters, for its so-called conclusion. So really, thank you very much for raising that. At the end, as I say, we've run out of time, sadly, but I think it's been an excellent discussion. Thank you very, very much indeed to all of our excellent panelists, to Roma, to Verity, to Amos, to Sandra, and to Anjali for your contributions and for sharing your experience as well. Thank you very much indeed also to everybody who posed questions and to all of our attendees. I know it's an issue that we will return to in the future. Hopefully in to give it more time and more detail as well, because I think we need to actually do that. Just to give a shameless plug to our next Infrastructure Intelligence webinar, which is at the end of May. It's on May the 28th, where we will be looking at the highly topical issue of the future of transport, which is extremely interesting given what has happened to it in the pandemic. Hands up anyone who's been on a train in the last 3 weeks. If you live in London or whatever, you may well have been. But anyway, we'll be looking at the future of transport and taking a deep dive into what that is going to be all about going forward. But for now, it's time to say goodbye from all of our panelists, who will wave at you in the time-honoured fashion. Thanks very much for all your contributions, and thanks very much for attending today's Infrastructure Intelligence webinar in association with BECG. Thanks, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.